I just saw the notice. Perfect. So this meeting is going to be recorded. It'll be on YouTube for you all afterwards. My name is Tiffany Jones. I am the Senior Substance Abuse Prevention Specialist for FCPS SAPS program, Substance Abuse Prevention Program. Each high school has a SAPS program. So we'll go over that in our intro, and then we're going to dive into what 11th and 12th graders will be learning this year. And as a result, how you can talk to your students about substances of misuse. And then we'll run through some examples with scenarios. So this is the time for you all to get active in the chat and answer some of the scenarios that I present. So first, our SAPS program was established in 2018. This is just a few of the people on the screen that you see, and each pyramid has a SAPS. So our SAPS provides services to every school within that feeder high school pyramid. So the SAPS at Lewis High School provides services to all of the middle and elementary schools that feed into Lewis. So every school has someone that can provide the drug education. So our program does prevention services for students, families, like what you see right now. We provide staff education, community education. Then we meet with students individually and via groups. So we also do intervention, meaning when there is a concern about a student's drug use, we'll meet with that student, whether it's because of a discipline referral or a non-discipline referral. All right, so first and foremost, we need to have a working definition of what psychoactive drugs are. And psychoactive drugs would be any type of mood-altering substance. So anything that has the potential to alter your mood is a psychoactive substance. I have the picture of the coffee there because, yes, coffee contains caffeine, which means that it is a mood-altering substance. And coffee does have a withdrawal profile, just like other substances of abuse. If you drink coffee every day and you drink it a bunch and you start to experience headaches when you haven't had your coffee, that is a withdrawal symptom. So throughout this presentation, we're going to have some screenshots from the 11th and 12th grade lesson that's going to be used. So you're actually going to get a visual representation of what your kids are learning. So first, we need to talk about the brain. So the brain develops from the back to the front. So the back part of our brain is really responsible for keeping us alive. So it's going to be all of the things that we don't have to think about: breathing, our heartbeat. And right around like that midbrain, you have something called the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for processing emotions and feelings. And then in the front of our brain, we have our prefrontal cortex. So our prefrontal cortex is responsible for all of that like higher order thinking. So when you ask yourself, like, why does my teenager do this? Like, this makes absolutely no sense. Weren't you thinking? And it's just because that front part of the brain isn't fully developed yet. So the brain is developed around the age of about 25, which is why our insurance rates decrease once we hit 25. The insurance companies know that our brain is working usually pretty well at that point. Now, the thing about being a teenager is that teenagers already have a lower level of dopamine. So dopamine is that chemical, that neurotransmitter in our body that makes us feel calm and makes us feel relaxed and in control. So teenagers already have a lower set point of dopamine. So when you feel like your kid is a bit moody, plus they're not processing their emotions very well, it's because of that amygdala and those low dopamine levels, plus that prefrontal cortex not being fully developed. Now, the thing that I want you to remember as parents is that we have to extend a bit of grace to young people because of that brain still developing, but also because they're supposed to take risk. It is the job of a young person to take risk. Now, what's important is the type of risk that they take. So we don't want them engaging in risky behavior, such as using drugs, engaging in a bunch of sexual activity. That's not the risk that we want our kids to take. We want them to try out for a new sport. We want them to take a new AP class that they haven't considered before. Those are the type of risk that we want them to take. Because when you take risk, you're learning that you can learn and acquire new skills. So it is a positive attribute for kids to take risk. So it's all about those good or bad experiences that we have that will change the brain. So it's important for us to consider, what bad experiences has my child endured that could lead to some of those problematic, risky behaviors. So speaking of, when you think about why some people use substances, I want you to consider that the actual drug use is like the top of that iceberg. What we fail to consider is what's going on underneath. So sometimes kids are using because of their depression, anxiety, trauma, emotional abuse and or neglect, being bullied, any type of loss. And that doesn't even have to be loss as far as grief and someone dying, but it could be the absence of a parental figure in their life. And then relationships. So the thing about being a teenager is, because their brain is developing from the back to the front, that back part of our brain is more so interested in the group. So for teenagers, it's, I need to be with my group because of evolution. If I'm not with my group, then I'm by myself. If I'm by myself, then that means that it increases my chances of being attacked and then experiencing an earlier death. So thanks to evolution, and this back part of our brain, when teenagers feel like they lose their friends, or when we tell them, just stop using drugs, just stop hanging out with those drug using kids, for them, it's like, wait. If I get rid of my group, then that leaves me vulnerable. So relationships are extremely important to kids because of that reason. Now, this is a picture that we incorporated into our lesson. So the lessons will be delivered. There will be 4 lessons total. Well, 2 lessons total for each grade. So for 11th graders, they're going to get a 30-minute lesson before winter break. And then they're going to get another 30-minute lesson prior to spring break. 12th graders are going to get a lesson during that same time frame. So one before winter break, one before spring break for 11th and 12th graders. So this is a screenshot from the 11th grade lesson. And what we're focusing on here is the fact that the nicotine ads in the tobacco industry is using the same marketing tactics that they used from years ago. So on the right, you'll see this Cool ad right here. So Cool was the brand of the tobacco, of the cigarette. And they have the woman who is presenting as like a beautiful, slim woman. She looks cool. And then they're doing the same thing, exact same pose here. Like, don't you want to be the cool girl? And the tactics are the exact same. So although they have rebranded, it's still the same formula that they're using. And the same is true here. So with the nicotine ads, they often will use things within social media, and they'll use famous people to market towards young people. So you see Gollum here, and it says, don't run out of precious e-liquid, because Gollum always says my precious, right? So if they're saying they're using this as something that kids would recognize, and then they're saying, don't run out of your e-juice, right? And then they have Bruno Mars here smoking his cigarette as well, because he's a very popular pop star. Now, the thing about THC is the active ingredient in cannabis. Cannabis would include marijuana, edibles. The thing about THC is that when it is used frequently and it is a high potency strain that has been used frequently, it will affect memory and learning. So when someone uses a potent strain regularly, the research is showing that it can result in a IQ drop of approximately 8 points. Now, what's important for you as parents to consider is that the potency of THC in cannabis varies. So when someone smokes cannabis, when it's the rolled up joint, it has a THC concentration of about 20%. And that's usually going to be your lower potency cannabis. And then next up would be vaping cannabis. So that has about 40% potency THC, and then dabbing 80%. And then edibles, it can range depending on how much the maker put in the gummy bear, how much the maker put in the brownie. But it also depends on how much the person consumes, because maybe the person was only supposed to eat one bite out of the brownie, but they consumed half of it. What we're realizing is that when kids are consuming THC, if they are hospitalized as a result of their use, it's usually because they were dabbing or because they were using an edible, because those have the highest potency of THC, and plus they're consuming more than they're used to. So within our lesson, we also talk about patterns of drinking, because we want to acknowledge that not all alcohol behavior is problematic. And this is important for you as parents, because if we're having conversations with young people and we're talking about alcohol being problematic, but you drink, then you want to acknowledge that not all alcohol use is problematic. So we're going to start with abstinence. So abstinence is, of course, when a person does not drink at all. Sometimes abstinence is related to sobriety, because a person is attempting to remove all mood-altering substances from their system because they might have had a problematic relationship with alcohol or another substance in the past. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the case for all people. Sometimes people are abstinent, but they're not sober for problematic drug use. So first we start with abstinence, and then we might move over into ritual drinking. So this would be drinking in the context of a religious service or a family rite. So for someone who might take communion, but they actually use wine instead of grape juice would be an example. And then, of course, social drinking. So drinking is appropriate to the time and place. So it's a celebratory drink. Sometimes we have had kids that will say, well, my mom or dad has let me drink champagne during New Year's. Now, would I suggest that? No. Definitely not, because when you give kids this much, they're going to extend it, right? So social drinking could include time and a place for it. And then, of course, there is compulsive or problem drinking. So this means that you have a problematic relationship with drinking. So that person drinks as a way to cope with their problems or their negative feelings. So I went like this for negative feelings in quotations, because feelings aren't necessarily negative or positive. It's just a matter of how you process your emotions and then what you do with it, right? So sadness isn't necessarily a negative feeling. It's just telling me something about my experience and the way that I'm processing that experience. So when someone drinks compulsively, they're drinking too much. They have probably attempted to limit their drinking, but they can't. They might have attempted to say, oh, I'm only going to drink on the weekends, but their weekends start on Thirsty Thursdays or Fun Fridays, which is no longer a weekend. And then, of course, we're going to talk about binge drinking. Binge drinking is more common when it comes to young people. So when kids drink, they're usually not drinking because they enjoy a nice little cocktail because they're trying to relax. They're drinking with the goal of getting drunk. So binge drinking for women would be 4 or more drinks in a short time span, usually about 2 hours. And then for men, about 5 drinks. And this is for adult bodies. Now, opioids are a popular topic right now. So opioids are typically prescription pain relievers. And we said typically prescription pain relievers because we have to include heroin in that mix. And heroin is illegal, but all of it is still an opioid. So opioids are typically prescribed for pain. So some examples would be heroin, fentanyl. Fentanyl is actually a legal drug. When it is prescribed, it is very useful. So when someone gets surgery, they are likely going to have fentanyl in their system because you do not want to feel that pain of someone slicing you open. So fentanyl is a good drug when it is prescribed, right? Sometimes fentanyl also comes in a transdermal patch, like a nicotine transdermal patch for when people are experiencing chronic unremitting pain. So even fentanyl is a good drug. It's just a matter of how you use it and if it is illicit or not, sold on the street or not. So some of the consequences of opioid use would actually be an increased sensitivity to pain. So this is interesting because opioids are prescribed to treat pain, but when someone constantly uses opioids, they become sensitive to pain. And that's because they've been using the opioid so long that their body doesn't know how to handle and process pain on its own anymore. Now, of course, there's going to be some anxiety and depression. Usually that's going to come from the feelings associated with withdrawal and then needing to manage that physical manifestation of the withdrawal symptoms, and then slowed breathing when someone is intoxicated under the influence of opioids or when they are experiencing an overdose. And then severe constipation, because what happens with opioids, because it is a depressant drug, it is going to slow down everything. So opioids are a central nervous system depressant. So it slows everything down. So it's going to slow down your breathing, your heart rate, your gastrointestinal system. So what happens with your gastrointestinal system is that it kind of cinches everything so that it slows down. So that's why people become constipated. And then when they are withdrawing from the opioid, everything opens back up, which usually results in vomiting, severe diarrhea, sweating, watery eyes. It is a very horrible experience to go through opioid withdrawal. Then we're going to see difficulty urinating because, again, everything kind of gets cinched up and closed and slowed down, decreases in immunity, and then organ failure over time. So the only thing that can reverse an opioid overdose would be naloxone. So naloxone is the generic name. Narcan is the brand name. So Narcan is the 4 milligram dose of the opioid reversal medication. There are other brand names, some that come in higher dosages. Some might come in 8 milligrams. I've seen 5 as well. And then there's naloxone brands that come in lower dosages. So Narcan is administered either IM via a shot in the muscle, or it is a nasal spray. So we do have our nasal sprays throughout our school buildings that are available in elementary, middle, and high school in case we have an overdose in the building. So we are well stocked within all of our school buildings with Narcan nasal spray in the event that an overdose happens. For those who would like to take a Narcan training, you can, if you live in Fairfax County, which you should because you're here, but if you live in Fairfax County, you can take the training called Revive, or the opioid overdose and naloxone education class. It is a virtual class that is offered both in English and Spanish. Once you take the training, which is about an hour in length, they will send you 1 box of Narcan. In that 1 box, you have 2 doses. So if you are a Fairfax County resident and you take that training, you will get a free box of Narcan. So this is a quote from Dr. David Mealy. He is well known within the substance use disorder community as a treatment professional. So he is quoted as saying that we should strive to attract more people into behavior change, not by coercion, disempowering, and demanding compliance, but by meeting people where they are in their various stages of change. And I thought that this was important to include here because a lot of times when parents are parenting their children, they just want them to do the right thing, right? And sometimes that desperation for your child to do what's right, what's noble, and what's safe comes at a cost of parents attempting to manipulate their child into good behavior. So the goal isn't to force kids into doing the right thing to not use drugs by delivering solely the information that you want them to hear, but the goal should be to provide them with factual information, concrete information that you have researched or that you have learned from sessions like this so that they can become empowered to make their own well-informed decision. And I know that that might produce a bit of cognitive dissonance for some parents because you want your kid to do the right thing, yet at the same time, we know that kids take risks, and sometimes those risks are inappropriate. But you still have to provide them that information because the goal is to get them to be autonomous adults who make good decisions on their own. It looks like the chat is going crazy right now. Hopefully you all aren't fussing about that quote. So with that, we're going to discuss sensationalism versus social norms. So sensationalism is the use of exciting or shocking stories or language at the expense of accuracy in order to provoke public interest or excitement. So this is when you say things to your child like, if you use drugs, you're going to die or go to jail. You're going to become addicted. But that's not true, because only about 10% of people will develop a substance use disorder who use drugs. The vast majority of people who decide to use drugs will not become addicted. But what you want to add into that layer of conversation with your child is, hey, we have a family history of mental health issues. We have a family history of addiction. Remember that uncle that I was telling you about that died? Yeah, well, he actually died due to fatty liver disease as a result of his alcohol use. That runs in our family. You might have that gene, and when you decide to use drugs, you're playing with fire because you don't know if that gene is going to become expressed in you. That's the conversation that you have, not if you do this, this is going to happen. You present the facts, right? Because kids are very smart. More often than not, they know more about drugs than we do. So when you present false information, they're seeing you as an unreliable source who is untrustworthy. So now we're going to go into the opposite of sensationalism. That would be social norms. So when youth are exposed to messages that explain the positive, true norms that most youth make healthy choices and engage in pro-social activities, they are more likely to take part in those positive behaviors. So we're not going to use language that says, all the kids are vaping in the bathroom. You can't go in there without kids vaping. That's not true. The vast majority of our kids do not vape. 97% of our children in FCPS do not use opioids. So we have to be mindful of the sensationalized language that we use, because if we as adults say everybody's doing this, it's this big problem, we got to get a wrap on this issue, right? We got to get a hold on it. Then kids are going to receive that as, well, if most people are doing it, and the part of my brain that wants to be with the group, right? If most kids are doing it and my brain says that I need to be with the group, then maybe I should do it because I don't want to be the oddball. So we need to communicate what's true. So sensationalism also looks like youth and adults overwhelmingly will overestimate the number of 12 to 18-year-olds who use substances. So we'll say things like everyone drinks. Most caregivers let their kids drink. But again, with social norms, we need to tell the truth and highlight the reality. So now, social norms in action. 90% of FCPS students do not drink. This is a true stat. And this was in the last 90 days. Instead, those students choose healthy activities like sports, movies, and game nights when hanging out with their friends. So now this is the time for you to drop in the chat. What do you notice about this statement? 90% of FCPS students within the last 30 days do not drink. Instead, they choose healthy activities like sports, movies, and game nights when hanging out with their friends. What do you notice about that statement? Go ahead and drop it in the chat for me. It is silent. So I'll just share. The thing that you notice about this statement is that we are talking about the kids that don't drink. So we're saying 90%, the overwhelming majority don't drink. We're not focusing on the 10%. So we're not saying 10% of FCPS students are drinking, right? We're focusing on the majority, because that's the social norm. That's what we want to focus on. And then we don't just focus on that, we then offer an alternative. So we say most kids play sports. Most kids go to the movies. Most kids have game nights. Most kids actually opt to drink soda instead of drinking alcohol. So we present the facts of what the majority is doing, and then we also highlight what kids are doing instead by offering an alternative. Now, when we misunderstand what truly happens when it comes to drug use, we act as if the solution to this drug epidemic or the drug issue is this magical unicorn, right? So it's, well, we don't know what to do. Everybody's doing this. It's not this magical, like the answer isn't this magical, mystical thing. It's simple. We just tell the truth. We provide people with the facts so that they can make their own well-informed decision. So now, of course, we need to talk about risk factors and then the opposite of that, protective factors, because oftentimes we focus on the risk factors like, oh my God, my kid might be more susceptible to drug use because of this, but let's highlight what's actually working. And we'll look at how they are the opposite of one another. So risk factor, aggressive behavior in childhood. So if we see that there's some aggressive behaviors in childhood that has the potential, it is the potential, but it doesn't mean that it is inevitable that it could increase their chances of using drugs. Now, a protective factor is belief that they have some type of self-control over their life, self-efficacy. I can do this thing. Risk factor, lack of parental supervision. Protective factor is parents monitoring and supporting. So going through their phone, paying attention to the cues, some of the things that's different within your child. Risk factor, low peer refusal skills. Protective factor, positive relationships. Most of what you see when it comes to the protective factors is going to relate back to connection. So connecting with an adult, connecting with a coach, a sponsor of an extracurricular activity, and also connecting back to themselves with that self-efficacy. So staying on that protective factor side, school anti-drug policies, right? So knowing that my community is here to protect me. And then of course, a risk factor is the availability of drugs at a school. Another protective factor is neighborhood resources, connecting again to my neighborhood. The opposite of that is community poverty. So again, the antidote or the solution to our drug problem isn't this unicorn. It's all of these protective factors, right? It's simply connection. It's not all of these different policies and strategies that we have to figure out, what we're going to do. It's the same answer for suicide. It's the same answer for mental health, depression, anxiety, all of these other things. It's our protective factors that relate back to connecting. So when you talk to adolescents about alcohol and other drugs, first, of course, your goal should be to show that you disapprove of underage drinking and drug misuse, right? You want to get them in the habit of following the law, which is why we say, well, if it's New Year's, you don't want to allow your kid to drink, right? And then second, show that you care about your child's health, wellness, and success. So you're not coming at it demonizing them for their behavior, but you're going to focus on the positive of how you want them to grow into a healthy and successful adult, whatever that might look like for them. And then third, show that you are a good source of information about alcohol and other drugs because you have educated yourself. You've attended webinars like this, you've researched. Maybe after this, you go onto SAMHSA's website. SAMHSA is SAMHSA. You're going to get a resource sheet with a bunch of hyperlinks, and this will be up there. But let's say you go onto SAMHSA's website and you review their Talk They Hear You program. So Talk They Hear You is a program where SAMHSA is educating parents about drugs so that you can then have productive conversations with your children. And they give you some examples on how to interact with your child. And then fourth, you're going to show that you're paying attention and that you are going to discourage risky behaviors. So you're not going to say, well, as long as you do it in my house, it's okay. No, because what kids hear is, well, my mom is okay with me doing it. Right? So they're not going to just limit it to your house. They're going to have it with them. They're going to bring it to school. Then they're going to share it with their friends because they think that they're being a good friend by sharing when really it's distributing a drug. And then lastly, you're going to build your child's skills and strategies for avoiding underage drinking and drug use. So giving them the language when they are interacting with their friends. All right, so this is what teens have to say about when adults communicate with them about drugs. So parents, family, teachers, or any other adult figure always preach honesty and trust when they can't even correctly inform children about an epidemic. And when they finally get the guts to sit down and talk, they don't even know what they're talking about. The only tactic they have to talk about drugs is to completely scare us away from even looking at drugs. Honesty is the best policy, even when it comes to drugs. Out of the mouth of babes. They said the scare tactics aren't working. Tell us the truth. You don't even know what you're talking about. And that's why you simply try to scare us. Out of the mouth of babes. So this is a video.
What is the address of the emergency? Please come down. My daughter's unconscious.
It's the sound of sheer panic.
How old is she? 15. Sophia! Sophia! She's on her back. Please hurry. Back up on the way.
It was a quiet afternoon near Boulder, Colorado, when Ryan Christoph finds his then 16-year-old daughter, Sophia, barely breathing.
I'm pushing on her chest and it's making some noise, but she's unconscious. Okay, and is she laying flat on her back? She's on her back on her bed. Listen carefully and I'm going to tell you how to do chest compression.
Within minutes, Sergeant David Cohen with the Lafayette, Colorado Police Department pulls up.
I'm going to count with you, okay? So try and go with the pace I'm counting, okay? Keep up with that pace if you can, okay? Hold on, I think it might be...
All right, you all can hear that sound, hopefully, because no one told me that they couldn't hear the video. The reason why I wanted to show you that video is because I want to steer you away from the sensationalism. A lot of times within our school systems in Northern Virginia, they show videos like this to children, right? So that video was showing that a child overdosed on an opioid, and then a police officer had to come in and administer Narcan to revive that child. So they're using that as like a scare tactic of, if you use an opioid, this is what's going to happen to you, right? And it's a possibility that it can happen, but we're not going to just focus on trying to get an emotional rise out of kids in an attempt to manipulate them into that good behavior. Because at the same time, when you show videos like this to young people, maybe they've had someone in their life that has experienced this. So what type of emotions are we riling up in them simply because we're trying to get them not to use? So what environment are we creating within them where they might be fearful or anxious or sad because they've seen this happen to their friends or loved ones? That's not the goal. So this is a more effective ad.
Since we were little, we've been inseparable, but vaping felt different. She tried it because I did, but when I stopped, she kept using it. Now I wish we never vaped. It feels like it's my fault she's hooked. Sharing vapes means sharing addiction. Learn the risk at behindthehaze.com.
So that video was actually created by young people for young people. So the teenagers who created that ad, they recognize that they don't want to negatively affect their peers. Again, that brain development, right? I want to be a part of the group, but I don't want to cause harm to my friends. So that the point driven home with that is empathy. And kids are very emotionally intelligent these days, especially. So that ad focused on a girl who started vaping. Her friend started vaping as well. But when girl A stopped vaping, her friend continued to vape, and she felt bad because she was a negative influence on her friend. So let's look at a true norm. So almost 80% of students believe it's very wrong or wrong to smoke marijuana or cannabis. Most students perform community service once per month or more. So our Fairfax County Youth Survey from 2021 showed this. So the question is, how wrong do you think it is for someone your age to smoke marijuana? And that is the answer there. So now, again, if you all are going to drop in the chat, I want you to fix this error. So the statement is, smoking may lead to lung cancer and possible death. What is the problem with this statement? When an adult shares this statement with a young person, what is the problem? And then what is the solution? How do we fix this? And I'll wait a bit. Very good. I see the focus on it leading to cancer, right? So it scares them, but should share costs and body effects beyond death. I like that because for them, they're like, cancer, please. 13, cancer is obviously way down the line. Remember, kids are so focused on the short term. They're not thinking about cancer. That's us older folks, right? We're like, oh, our lungs. Oh no, I'm getting older. Don't want to get cancer because my grandpa had, or whatever, right? But kids are not thinking about that because that is too far down the line. So yes, so it is a scare tactic. Although it is true because it's saying may lead to cancer, and possible death, that's good because it's showing that there's a potential for it and not it being inevitable, right? But it's still a scare tactic and only focus on the short term. Very good. So someone said it would be good to focus on feeling healthy and the majority of kids and activities doing healthy things. Very good. Very, very good. So instead, our solution might look at talking about some of the short-term consequences of smoking leads to bad breath because kids do not want their breath to stink, yellow teeth, right? So we're not talking about the wrinkles and all that because that's us that's worried about our skincare regimen now. All right, so let's go to our next one. So fix this error. An adult says to a child, if you use drugs, you're going to become addicted, die, or go to jail. What is the problem? You all should know this because I already said it earlier. Yes, it's very defined. It boxes them in. It boxes them in. Very good. Next one. So your child says, if marijuana is legal in my state, why can't I use? What might you say as a parent? So the hint that I have provided is that adolescents are more exposed to the drug now because as we have legal marijuana or cannabis, then we have decriminalized cannabis, right? So they're more exposed to it. And also we have the medical and then the recreational use. So your child says, if marijuana is legal in my state, why can't I use? What do you say as a parent? Very good. Legal only over 21. And let's add in a bit extra. So yes, we could go in with the, well, it's legal for me, but not for you, right? What's the other piece that we want to add in? What about the brain? Brain is still developing. The teen brain is more susceptible to drug use and forming a habitual relationship with the drug, right? Because the brain isn't done developing until about 25. Now, if we want to add on an extra stat to that, although only about 10% of people will have a problematic relationship with drugs when they decide to use, of that 10%, 90% of them started using prior to 18. So again, that's that added fact that you can talk with or that you can share with your child. 90% of people who have an addiction started when they were a teenager because their brain is going to hold on to it because they're still developing. All right, next one. Your child says, why do you drink? So the hint is that there are differences between social drinking and binge drinking. So now what do you say as a parent? When your child says, why do you drink? This one's a little bit harder for y'all. The amount of drinking, very good. So you're going to talk about how you limit yourself. You're not intending, like the intention isn't to get drunk. You're just drinking. Being considerate of the effects, very good. Someone in the chat sounds like me. I generally don't drink. I'd rather eat my calories for sure. I am a big foodie. Give me a good meal over a drink. Very good. And that's also a good way to connect with them too, using humor. Like our drug conversations, although they are important, they don't always have to be serious and stuffy, right? You can say, I'd rather eat my calories. So you might see me drink here and there, but I just love a good meal. And then you can connect it back to your child. Or remember that time we had the lamb, blah, blah, blah. Make it a little bit lighter. So this is a quote from the U.S. Department of Justice. So rates of substance use among youths were lower among those whose parents disapproved of substance use than among those whose parents did not disapprove. So when you are vocal about your stance when it comes to their use, they want to appease you. And we know that because when we look at the, like when kids are polled and you look at who they believe when they are getting health information, parents are near the top. So they're going to believe their friends, the internet, parents. So what you say matters. And then they believe y'all more so than nurses, doctors, and health professionals, which makes it even more important for you to educate yourself about the facts so that you can communicate it to them and with them. And then the police at the bottom. So that is all for us. So the summary of our session is that everyone is responsible for the future of youth. So it's not just you as a parent, but we have to come together as a collective with that community by connecting, right? And then you need to tell the truth. And most importantly, have frequent small talk. So it's not just this one time sit down, let's have a drug talk. We're just going to have kind of frequent small talks that just come up naturally. So any questions that you all have, now is the time. You can drop it in the chat. I know Lisa might come in and moderate, and Diana Vera from our substance abuse prevention program has been answering questions for you all as well. Our Spanish presentation, the same thing, delivered completely in Spanish, is next week, same time. The slides will be in Spanish as well. Diana Vera and Brian Villalobos will be presenting that in Spanish. So any questions?
I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Go ahead, put some questions in the chat, and we can answer them for you.
I see a comment that says it is also very important to let the kids know that they can come to their parents when they use drugs, drink, when they use drugs or drink instead of hiding it. Totally agree. Totally agree. That's why it's so important to have those frequent small talks, because when you have frequent small talks, it becomes a norm, right? It's the social norm within your family to talk about things that might be relatively uncomfortable for you as the parent and as the kid. But despite it being uncomfortable, we were able to have the conversation and life just kind of went on. Very good. So that when they're in those situations, they feel like they can text you a code word, or they can text you real quick for some feedback and advice. We have someone that said the drinking piece was harder for our family when our family lived abroad. Yep. Especially when the drinking ages are lower. And when living abroad, it was generally okay for teens to drink. How to approach this? So I think the question is, how do I approach this in a way that helps explain why there are cultural differences? Sorry, I was trying to read through some of the typos. I think that that's what you focus on, is some of the cultural differences, right? So it's well, when we're in this country, this is the social norm over there, right? But also, I think that it's important to, again, highlight the facts of, in some of these countries, although the young people are allowed to, and it's normal for them to drink, we see that they actually have lower rates of substance use disorders. But why is that? It could be because of the whole environment, right? So it's a culture of people not being overworked. It's a culture of people recognizing that they need to rest. It's a culture of people connecting. It's not a drinking culture like in the States where people are pounding beers at the football game. It's not a culture of people binge drinking. It's not a culture of sex and alcohol constantly being paired together. Whereas in other cultures, you have alcohol, but it's family environments, right? Everybody's chill. We're just sitting around laughing, having a good time. But over here, our drinking culture is usually paired with violence, large, loud crowds.
Yeah, do you
Uh,
see the question in the chat? One of the first FCPS opioid presentations last spring at Fairfax High School had a scared straight type presentation from a federal agency. And the parent doesn't remember which one. Something with silence in the title name. She was surprised and disappointed. Dr. Reed mentioned at our community conversation that this presentation is still being done at some high schools. Is this something families need to advocate for so that a different approach in presentation is used going forward?
yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, please. You all are the people that they listen to. Parents are the people that they listen to. So when you attend these sessions and you learn, oh, that's not working, because all of this research is showing that scare tactics don't work, but you see it happening, please use your voice. You are the people that they listen to. You are talking about the Silent No More program that was developed by the Department of Justice, I believe. It could be the Department of Justice or the Department of Juvenile Justice. That program occurred at 5 of our schools last school year. I have not heard that it's happening or has happened already this school year, but our SAPS program was not involved with that. Okay. That's all I have to share on that. I see
Where,
oh,
yeah,
go
where do
ahead.
the
You're going to read
percentage,
it for me. Thank you.
I'll read it for you. Where
Thank
do the
you.
percentages of kids vaping or smoking come from?
The FCPS youth survey. So the youth survey is administered every school year to 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And they're just asking them a bunch of questions about their life, like what's going on, what do you do for fun, what do you do that might be risky behavior, and then we take that we take that information and then we disseminate it out. What I will share is that sometimes people, let me stop sharing my screen so that you all can see me full. I know that sometimes people are like, well, how can we trust the stats? How do we know that kids are reporting accurately? And what I will say is that the research about the research shows that middle schoolers are more likely to lie and say that they do something more. So they're more likely to say that they use drugs more than they actually use drugs, because in their mind, the big kids are using drugs. And we want to do what the big kids are seemingly doing. Again, that's why it's important to share the true social norms, because if we share the true social norms, the middle schoolers won't lie and believe that all the big kids are doing the drugs. And then also when it comes to high schoolers and college students, when we do research studies, they're more likely to tell the truth, even to their own detriment. The people who lie about their substance use and healthy behaviors are usually us adults, 30 plus. Oh, yes, I work out 5 times a week, rarely ever miss the gym. I have fruit and vegetables with every meal. I rarely drink, usually just like once a month. It's usually us who are lying because we're trying to protect our reputation.
That made me laugh out loud. Right? It's usually us. All right,
Yep.
Tiffany, I just want to thank you for your presentation today. This is so valuable for families to know how to have that conversation with with their students about drugs. So thank you. And I put the evaluation link in the chat. So if you could give us some feedback, we'd appreciate it. So everybody have a good afternoon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for being here.